All right, so we're going to continue work on our personal website. And today we're going to be focusing on some ideas around the box model. So, the box model is basically the way your browser will style sections of your site as far as like how things are laid out, in particular, the spacing around things, the space within things, and things like borders and width and height, all the kind of boxy things that you need to do on a layout or a website. So we're not going to dive super deep. We're just going to be laying some bedrock here that later on that we will need to use to create more complex layouts. So we're just going to keep incrementally updating this website and then demonstrating these techniques while we go. So this website here, internetingishard.com, and this has some nice visualizations of the box model that I just wanted to show real quick. So in particular, I think there was one down here that we'll be talking around a bit. So when you're thinking of a box in your code, so that could be any kind of block level element, which might be a div or a main tag. There are several different kinds of box level elements. There are several attributes you need to think about. In particular, these properties here: content, padding, border, and margin. So content is the actual content space. So text or images, anything that's inside that box is content. So other tags within that element. And then padding is the space inside or around the content, but it's still inside the box. The border is the outline of the box if you have one. And then outside the box, like how far does it push things around it, is the margin. So with all of these elements combined, we can create a lot of different styles of like boxes and layouts and things like that. So let's take a look at our site here and let's think about the box model a bit in the context of spacing. So one thing I'm noticing is that there is kind of a large gap between this headline here and this paragraph here. What might be causing that? Well, this is another thing we're going to be learning today is how to use the Chrome dev tools. So make sure you're using Chrome here when you're looking at your page. Safari also has dev tools, and so does Firefox, but just for sake of simplicity, we're going to focus on Chrome's dev tools, which are quite good. I'm going to select the text here or just right click on it and say inspect. So if you command click, right click, control click, it'll bring up this whole panel over here, which is cool. And I've got my dark theme on, so yours may not look exactly like that. But I can see my HTML up here in the element side. So all my tags that I've written, and I can hover over those, and those will highlight on the page. And we'll talk more about that in a second. But you can get lots of interesting information from this in inspecting things. Down here, I see my CSS. So when I select this H1, it'll highlight any of the CSS styles that apply to that element. So one of the cool things about this CSS panel right here, let me make this bigger just in case. One of the cool things about this panel is it has these little checkboxes next to the attributes, and I can just uncheck them. So like I unchecked that font size 2.5 EM, which is in my style sheet right, where is it? Right here. I unchecked that in the browser and it just crosses it out. I can check it back, but it gives you a quick visual comparison of what that change looks like. Now, and the other cool thing you can do is you can just change this directly. So let's say, well, what if I wanted to see what it would look like if I did 4EM? So I can just type that in there, 4EM. Note this is not saving your code. It's just updating the browser's version of the code. But it's a great way to like just experiment around. So I can even do the up and down arrows to kind of see different sizes there. Now, if I refresh the page like this, Command R, it's just going to go back to whatever is in the style sheet, which is what it should do. So this isn't really so much for actually creating and editing things, but it is a great way to kind of tweak stuff and to try to figure out what's going on in your code when you're diagnosing problems. So I highly recommend getting familiar with this inspector. So both the elements up here, being able to select things, and then seeing what the CSS does when you like check or uncheck things, for instance. So this is a pretty cool, powerful tool. I also, you can experiment with changing text headlines too. So I could do like, instead of hi, I'm Mark, I could just say, yo, I'm Mark. And it'll actually change the text on the page. Again, it's not actually updating my HTML. It's just changing the browser's version. So if I refresh, it's gone. So this is kind of a fun trick you can do. You can actually kind of mess around with people with this. Like you can do this on any website on the internet, including social networks like Facebook, Twitter, whatever. Just imagine the power you have by being able to change text and then screenshot that. So don't get yourself in trouble, but it can be kind of fun to think about the possibilities there. For the sake of this project, though, we're just going to be using this in a very practical way to try to adjust some spacing and things like that. So let's start by looking at this H1 tag. Notice the orange bars up above it and below it. Those orange bars represent margin. So whenever you see orange in there, then that's what you should think is margin. And I thought at some, like, let me see. I thought they had, yeah, here it is. Okay, so under computed here in this styles tab, you can see how this actually is playing out. So this is the content box, high at mark, which is rendering at 800 by 50 pixels. There's no padding on it, so that's just kind of grayed out. There's no border on it, but there is a default margin, and it looks like it's set at 26.8. Now, I didn't set that, so where did that come from? Well, that's just the default. The browser just does that by default. So headings automatically have a margin on them. Certain tags automatically have padding on them. For instance, actually, if I look at my body tag here, notice that there's margin around the body too. So a lot of times what you'll want to do when you start a project, though, is just to kind of reset all those baselines. And so I'm going to do that. This is what is called a CSS reset. This is also mentioned in this tutorial here. But I'm going to go ahead and add it to this site so we can have a good baseline for our styling. So right here at the top, actually, I'll just put it right below this variable section. I'm just going to add this style rules. So what does this mean? Well, this asterisk means apply this rule set to any tags. So anything. Every single tag will get these styles. And first of all, it's setting the margin to 0 to get rid of any default margins that are there, and then the padding to 0. And then it's also doing this strange thing and saying box sizing border box. So this won't bite us so much today, but anytime you're dealing with padding and width of elements, the default mode for that is kind of confusing. And again, the tutorial goes into this in more depth than I will here in the video, but there is a very good reason for setting, let me see if I can find it in here. Yeah, so setting the box sizing border box fixes some of the awkwardness you have around setting widths on things. So for instance, if you had a box that was 200 pixels wide, and that's what you put in your CSS width, 200 pixels, but then it had padding in a border, the actual width of it, like say you had a border with 1 pixels, the actual width of that box would be 202 pixels, which as a designer, if you're trying to be precise, that is not very helpful behavior. And so by setting box sizing to border box, it gets around that problem, and you can have more precise control. So I would just recommend almost always doing this. So like when you start a new website, just go ahead and paste in that code, and I'll give you a reset. So let's see what that looks like, that reset. And wow, we just lost like all of our spacing and indentation, which you might be like, well, why did we do that? And the main reason is just so that we actually made a conscious decision about it. We're not just accepting the browser's defaults. We're actually trying to do something that is aesthetically pleasing and what we want. And it also just removes some kind of awkwardness that can happen later. So let me just resize these windows next to each other, and I'll close this panel for now. And then let's start worrying about what we actually want for spacing here. So first of all, I'm seeing like, this image now is hugging the top of the page. Maybe we should have some padding on the main section. So we do have a style for main. Actually, it looks like we have one for main and footer. You know what? What might be better is just putting it on the body tag, the padding. So let me make a new rule up top here. Doesn't really matter where you put it so much, but I'm going to do padding, and let's start with 20 pixels and see how that looks, okay? So what that'll do is it'll bump out this guy from the edge, and let's go ahead and inspect there too, just to see what we're doing. So if I click on body, see that green bar? So margin shows up as orange, padding shows up as green. So that green is showing that 20 pixels of padding that we just added to the body tag. All right, so next up, we do probably need some margin below, so some spacing below these headings. So let's go ahead and add that just to add some spacing out. And I think we have a style rule here for headings. So let's do margin bottom. And I think that browser was defaulting to 26 pixels before, which I felt like was a bit much. Let's try maybe 14 pixels. You can just play around with this value until you find something you like. So yeah, that's a bit better. But look, also, this doesn't have any spacing on the top. So this is where you should ask yourself a question. I could apply margin to this paragraph here. So if I inspect this paragraph, I could add margin to that, and actually, I can just do that here in the browser to show you what that would look like. So margin bottom 10 pixels, you can see that'll bump it down, and I can go up and down with that. That would do what I want, but the problem with that is like that's on the paragraph tag itself. So if I had other paragraphs, I may not always want the margin to be that, or maybe I would. So let's see, if I had multiple paragraphs in a row, would I still want to have a gap between them? If the answer is yes, then the paragraph tag is where you want to put it. Otherwise, maybe we need a margin top on the H tags. I think for now, let's go ahead and put a margin bottom on the paragraph tag. So there's really no right or wrong answer here, which is part of what I'm trying to demonstrate. There's lots of different ways to accomplish the same goal. So for now, let's just go ahead and let's put a margin, let's say 10 pixels on the paragraph tag. Okay, so that's starting to flow a bit better. And I do think now that we've done that, let's see what happens if we add a margin bottom to those heading tags, the heading tags as well. So we've got margin bottom. What happens if we add a margin top? So added margin bottom here and then margin top to the same thing. Yeah. Okay, so that's looking a bit better, a little bit closer to what we had originally. Now, this is an interesting thing. So I added margin bottom to this paragraph, right? 10 pixels. And then I added a margin top to this. Now, if you look at the orange bar there, see the orange bar below the paragraph and then the orange bar above the H2? Well, those are getting merged. So this is called margin collapsing, which they also talk about somewhere in this article as well. So just be aware of that. If you have a margin that's on the bottom of something that is intersecting with a margin that's on the top of something, it will collapse that into one value. So the actual margin there is 14 pixels. So that's just something to be aware of. All right, so this is looking a bit better. I think, though, I've kind of lost the indentation on these bullets because those have a default value by the browser, but when we reset them at the top, we lose all that. So we need to decide, okay, well, how do we want those to be indented, or even do we want them to be indented? And I think the answer is yes. So let's go ahead for now and make a new style rule for those list elements. So if we look at our code, our HTML, we've got a UL tag and then an LI tag, and then we've got stuff inside of those LI tags. So you'd have to ask yourself, which one of these tags should have the margin or padding applied to it? And we look at it in the browser, there's the UL in the inspector. These are the LI tags. So which one of those would you add the spacing to? Well, there's really no correct answer here. You could add it to any of them. You could add it to the LI tag, or you could add it to the container, the UL tag. Let's start with the container and see what that gets us. So let's do UL, and then we'll do, let's see, margin or padding. That's always the question. Let's do margin left, and we'll do 14 pixels again just because we've been using that. And let's see what that looks like. Yeah. So now it is indented kind of inline. I think we could probably indent a little bit more. Let's go 20 pixels in. Yeah, so that's actually looking a bit more like a bulleted list. All right, so I think we're back to kind of where we were before, or at least pretty close. So now we need to think about the spacing between these elements. So these LI tags are kind of stacked really closely on top of each other. Maybe those would benefit from some margin on the bottom as well. So here I'm going to do UL-LI. So this space here just means go inside of. So start with the UL, go inside of it to the LI tag, and then apply these rules. So UL-LI, margin bottom, and let's do our good old 14 pixels again. Yeah, there we go. So they're spaced out a bit more now. And actually, that may be a bit too much. Just eyeballing it, it doesn't look quite right. Let's try 10. Yeah, I think that's working well enough for now. All right, so that was just kind of manually going in there after we reset, just to recap real quick, we reset everything. So all the tags, margin 0, padding 0, box sizing, border box. And then we're resetting those margins on headings, on paragraphs, on list tags, and all that stuff. We're doing it manually so that we have control of it. All right, so up next, let's think more about boxes a bit. So one of the things I would be interested in doing is making these links look a bit more like, not necessarily like buttons, but a bit fancier than they are now. So I just want to try something. Yeah, I don't know if this is going to work or not, so we'll see. I'm going to add a variable for a kind of a gradient kind of highlight color up here. So to do a variable, you just do dash dash and then the variable name, highlight. And the variable name could be anything you want. So I'm going to call it highlight. And then I'm going to do this thing called a linear gradient. And this applies to a background property. So I just pasted that in, but I'm going a linear gradient that's at 90 degrees in between these two colors. So now I can use this variable somewhere. So what am I going to do with this? Well, and just fair warning, we're going to change these colors probably. It's not going to look right away, but let's just apply that gradient to our link tags. Do we have a style for link? Yeah, we do. So we have a color for them, but let's set a background on them. So background, and that's where we're going to use our var highlight. And we'll see what that gives us. Okay, so yeah, you can see there is a gradient kind of back there. It doesn't really work though because the colors aren't quite right, but I think that's enough to kind of start with. So let's say we want the background color to gradiate between our foreground color and our background color. Let's see what that does. So that adds this interesting looking highlight thing. I think we can just tweak this a bit and get something that's closer to what we want. So let's see. Instead of fading to straight black, let's do it to a semi or a straight dark color. Let's do a semi-opaque. So if you remember from last time, RGBA 000 is black, and then this is the opacity, so 0.5. And so yeah, that's fading it out a bit. I wonder if we can just add colors in here to make this gradient more advanced. I don't know if that'll work or not, but let's try it. So if we start with black and then go to the green, teal, and then we go back to black. Yeah, that does work. Okay. So this is getting a little bit closer to what we want. It still looks a bit weird with this kind of shine in the middle. So what I really want, I think, is an RGB version of this color. And so this is another area where the inspection tools are helpful. I can just select this. And then if I look at my color here, this is the link color. It gives me this nice little color picker, and I can adjust the opacity right here in the browser. So I don't have to you could do this in Photoshop too, but it's easier just to pull it up contextually. So let's adjust the opacity down to something quite a bit lower. And then we're going to copy that code. And you can change what mode you're doing. This is the RGBA version. Or you can do the hex or the HSL. There's different color modes you can do. Let's try the hex version. So I'm going to copy that from Chrome over here, and I'm going to paste it into my CSS code. And let's see what that looks like. Yeah, so it's like a bit knocked back now, which is more what we're looking for. I think we could probably knock it back even farther. Let's go back to that color we got. Let's go back. Let's see. Let's try something like that. I'm just going to copy and paste it again, and then save it, Command R, refresh. Yeah, now it's just got a little bit of a glow on it. Now, we could do something cool here, I think, maybe, where when you hover over it, maybe the gradient or whatever becomes more obvious. Now, I'm expecting you to tweak this to your own style preferences. You don't have to do the same kind of gradient I did. In fact, you don't have to do a gradient at all if you don't want to. You could just do something with the background. But the point is that we're just playing with these link elements a bit. So let's see. Let's make another variable. I'm just going to duplicate this line. You can do that by hitting Command-Shift-D. And I'm going to call this highlight hover. So that'll be what happens when you hover over the link. And that's when you roll your mouse on top of it. So let's make a rule for that here. So we got, actually, I thought we already had an A hover. Let me just search. No, we do not. So I'm going to put it right below here. So A hover, that just means apply these rules when the mouse is over the link tag. And I'm going to change out the background to be our highlight hover variable. So highlight hover is actually the same as hover right now because I just duplicated it, but we can now change it to be something maybe a little bit more highlighted. So let's get another color here. Let's lighten it up a bit. And we'll see what this looks like. So I'm not going to play around with this stuff as much as I usually would just for sake of time. But I would just play around with these colors and highlights until you get the effect that you want. So let's see what happens here when I hover over these. Yep, you can see it kind of glows a bit when I roll over it. All right, so cool. Now, let's say for just example's sake, what if I wanted to make these links down here? Or actually, you know what? Let's change gears a bit. What if I was going to make a button for contacting me? So assuming that you're advertising your services and you want people to reach out to you, contact me might be what you'd call a CTA, a call to action. That's very important. So let's say we want to put a contact button right up here that links to an email address. So let's go ahead and write the HTML code first, and then we will talk about how to style this guy. So the HTML code for that might be something like, well, it'll be a link tag since you're clicking on something. So href equals, remember href, that's just the attribute that tells the link where to go when you click it. We'll fill that in a minute, and I'm going to say contact me /a, and we'll see what happens. There's a contact me link. It looks like our other links. It's cool. And I want to link to my email address here, which you can do with a special syntax. So I can say mail to markjohnson@hey.com. So whatever your email address is, if you put that mail to : this, what that'll do, and I think it should work here, is if you click it, it'll open up your default mail provider with that as an address. So that's a mail to link is what that's called. Do make sure you're using a good email provider if you're doing that, because you'll get spammed if you don't. But things like Gmail and most like mainstream mail providers have good enough spam filters that it's fine to list your email address like that. All right, so there's my contact me link. Let's say I want to make that more prominent though. I want to make that look like a button. So this is where we did use this a little bit last week, but we're going to do it again here. And this is where it's helpful to have a CSS class. So in my HTML, I'm going to say class equals button here. And class is just a way of saying, I want this to be this label to be associated with this tag for the sole reason, really, to style it. So now in my styling, I can say, I want to override the default styles of this A tag, like this particular one right here, and I want to make it a button. So I can do a.button here. So dot just means in CSS syntax, it means the A tag with the class name of button. And now I can apply styles specifically to that. So let's say I want to override, let's just start out with like a really dumb one. So background red. Now it's red. So you can see I only override that particular thing. It still gets the styles from the A tag stuff up here, like the color is still the same. It still has the underline and everything else. But the background color has been overridden, so with the button class. So I could apply that to any link on the page. So let's say I add class equals button to this link right here. Let's see what happens when I refresh. Now, see, now they're both red. So the point of the class is that you could reuse it. We're not going to do that. We're just going to apply it to this button up here. But that's the point of CSS classes. It's basically a name you can give elements that you could reuse styles for. All right, so what to use are, let's say we want our button background to be our foreground color. So let's use our var, FG color. And then we want our color to be our background color. So we're just like inversing it. BG color. And let's see what that looks like over here. Yeah, so we're getting a bit closer maybe to what we want. And let's do text decoration. We're going to remove the underline because it's not like a normal link. Text decoration, none. So now that underline is gone. And this is where the box styling comes in a bit. See how cramped that looks right there? Like the text is bleeding right up against the edge of that box. Well, that's where padding comes in. So I need some space around that content. If you remember the content box image we had up here, let's go back to it. We've got content and then we've got padding. So what we're adjusting here is this padding part. So let's say padding Let's start with like 6 pixels and see what that gets us. Yeah, so that is starting to look more like a button already. Let's also say, like, this has got some harsh, sharp edges to it. Don't want to cut anyone when they touch that. So let's round that out a bit. We can do that with border radius. So border radius, and let's say 8 pixels. See what that does. Gonna round that guy out a bit. Yeah, we could probably go a bit more roundy. That's right, 18 pixels. We're going nuts. Okay, good. So the padding looks fine on the top and bottom here, but it looks a little tight on the left and right because I rounded the radius right that. So how do I do that? How do I set it on the top and bottom and left and right? Well, I could write it out like very mundanely. So padding left, whatever, and then padding right, whatever. But that's boring. I don't want to write that much. So there's a shortcut syntax, and your tutorial will go into this as well. But on the top and the bottom, we can set 6 pixels and leave that. But on the left and the right, I want to try 10 pixels. So I've got 2 values in padding now. This one applies to top and bottom, and this one applies to left and right. And so a lot of CSS attributes like margin and padding and border, they have these kind of shortcuts in them that you can use. So I'm going to do that shortcut, and let's see what that looks like. So yeah, now I've got more spacing on the left and the right. I have 10 pixels and 6 pixels on the right. Let's inspect that bad boy and see exactly how that played out. So I've got my button selected here, and let's look at the computed. So yeah, now you can see I've got 6 on the top and the bottom, and 10 on the left and the right, and no margin and no border. So yeah, so we've got a bit of a button there. Looking at this, I think I would rather use that kind of teal color as the background. So I think that was our link color, right? Yeah. So let's use the link color instead of the foreground color. Just dash link color. And let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that's getting a bit more button-like. What would happen if we turned that to the foreground color? Ooh, too late. Can't do that. So let's keep it BG color. All right. So now we have a contact me button. Now, this is weird. Like, it's not really spaced out how I would expect. So this P tag has a margin on it, but it's not really pushing the button down. Why is that? Well, it's because of inline and block elements. An A tag is an inline element because it doesn't cause a line break. It doesn't exist on its own line. So this A tag, for instance, just flows with whatever text is next to it. Well, this button, even though I'm treating it like a box, is really still an inline element. So margin above it, like this P tag, does not affect it. And this tutorial will go into that in more detail, but how do we fix that? Well, since I am treating this like a box already, let's just go ahead and make it a block level element. So I'll just go display block, and then we'll see what that does for us. And boom, it did get the spacing now. It's being affected by that margin, but look at the width. All of a sudden it just expand the whole page. So we don't need the button to be quite that big. I mean, maybe we do want people to click it, but I don't think we need to be that gregarious about it. So let me just set a width here. I don't remember if this works or not. Let's try width auto. Nope, it doesn't work. I think what we want actually is a fixed width in this case, or at least a max width. So let's try 140 pixels. Yeah, that's closer. And notice that when I set a width on the button, it kind of, the text is no longer centered because the button is not shrinking to the text. So I need to fix that as well. I would do text align center. And now we'll have a centered label on that. So another thing about buttons is you probably want to have a hover style on those because buttons tend to need like more interactive looking UI state. So I'm just going to duplicate my class here. I just did that Command-Shift-D thing again, by the way. And then I'm going to add that hover attribute. So these are the styles I'll apply when I hover. And let's try just reversing these. So I'm going to reverse the background color and the link and the color on hover. So I'm just cutting those and pasting them. And I don't think we need the other stuff. So I'm only putting the attributes in there that I'm actually going to change when I hover. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, so you see it kind of reverses there. Now, the background kind of disappears when it reverses because it matches the background of the website. So there are a few ways we could get around with that. Let's try adding a border on hover, 1px solid link color. So this is the width of the border, the style of the border, and then the color. Let's see what that does. Yeah, there we go. That's better. But notice that, see that little jump when I hover? how it's bumping the headline below it down? Well, that's because this box has a border, or this button has a border on hover, but this one does not have a border. And so when the border is added, it pushes whatever is below it down by whatever your border width is, so like 1 pixel. So to fix that, you could add just like a transparent border here. So 1px solid transparent. So there's like a hidden border now. And now when I roll over it, it doesn't bump at all. So yeah, that looks pretty cool. Looks pretty nice. And that would be how you would make just kind of a basic boxy like button. Now, the cool thing about, again, we demoed this earlier, but now that I've got it more fleshed out, I'm going to show you. If I wanted to make, say, these links down here buttons, it's really easy now because I already wrote all the style rules for it. All I've got to do is add this class. So class equals button and class equals button. And if I save that and refresh, then I've got, button links now for my Twitter and Medium. So I'm not going to do that for now. I think I only want one button, but just for demonstration's sake, that is a really cool part of CSS, is when you can make these like class rules like this that then you can reuse anywhere on your website. And in fact, like since they're all in the same CSS file, the styles.css, you could use them on any page on their website. So if you had a bigger website that was like 5 pages, you could use that same button class across all of them. So it kind of gives you a way to create this like style guide that you and your team could use. So this is how a button looks. This is how a primary button looks, a secondary button, all those kind of things with CSS classes that let you create these patterns that you can just reuse over and over again. So it's a pretty cool thing. We didn't do like a ton of stuff here. We're just kind of messing around with margins, paddings, and then some box stuff. Do go through this as well. This goes into more depth on a lot of the things that we talked about. So once you've practiced this enough, I think by the next project or the next iteration of this, we'll be ready to start working on some more layout-centric stuff. So that's it for now. And let me know if you have any questions at all.